This episode of the Tactics Meeting is brought to you in part by Gallagher Marine Systems. Gallagher Marine Systems is the industry's most comprehensive source of full-service, in-depth compliance support. And by the Washington State Maritime Cooperative, the only non-profit umbrella plan holder dedicated to oil spill readiness for commercial vessels operating in Puget Sound and the greater Salish Sea. Formed in partnership with Washington State in 1995 to protect these waters, WSMC has long stood at the intersection of maritime response and environmental protection, supporting safe commerce while safeguarding the coastlines we all depend on. Learn more at wismiccoop.org.
Well, it's time for another episode of the Tactics Meeting. I'm your host, Dan Smiley, and here on the program, we talk to subject matter experts about response tactics and technology. And today we've got a little bit of a different kind of a show because I'm thrilled to have Lovel Pratt from Friends of the San Juans. Lovel is the Marine Protection and Policy Director for Friends of the San Juan. She has been involved in oil spill response planning and environmental issues with the Harbor Safety Committee and the Northwest Area Contingency Plan for many years. And so this is a little different perspective on what we do here. Lovel, welcome to the program.
Hey, thank you, Dan. Great to be here with you.
Hey, let's start off by finding out a little bit about how you came to be part of this broader maritime protection, oil spill prevention, environmental community, and then hear a little bit about what the Friends of the San Juans are and what your mission is.
Okay, great. Actually, maybe I'm going to turn that around and just start out by saying that I'm the Marine Protection and Policy Director at Friends of the San Juans, and our mission is to bring people and nature together to protect the San Juan Islands and the Salish Sea through education, science, policy, and law. And I've been here at Friends since 2018 as a full-time staff member, and I would describe my work more as not so much oil spill response planning, but advocacy for oil spill prevention and improved oil spill response preparedness.
Well said. Well.
Yeah. So I just wanted to add that little bit of clarification there. And how I got to this work very circuitously. So I really didn't know anything about any of these issues prior to being a member of the San Juan County Council. And in that capacity, I realized very quickly, and maybe I should just describe San Juan County, first of all. I'm sure most of the people watching this know, but we're
maybe not though, because we have people that listen really from all over the country.
Oh, okay.
I wouldn't assume that it's just, like Washington people who are listening. They're listening in Canada, they're listening in New York, they're all over the place.
Yeah. Well, the San Juan Islands are at the center of the Salish Sea, and there's a picture over on this side of the Salish Sea ecosystem, and the San Juan Islands are just right at the center, and we're surrounded. It's a county that has over 410 miles of shoreline, so many, many islands, and our islands are surrounded by the Strait of Juan de Fuca is to the west, and that leads into Haro Strait and Boundary Pass and Rosario Strait that surround the islands. And those straits include major shipping lanes. So all the vessel traffic that goes up to Canada's largest port, the Port of Vancouver, circumnavigates the islands through Boundary Pass, Haro Strait, and Lower Georgia Strait. And there's the 4 of the 5 refineries in Washington State, Circle, San Juan County, 2 in Anacortes and 2 on Cherry Point. And so, we're surrounded by major shipping traffic. And as a San Juan County Council member, I realized that the biggest threat to both San Juan County's environment and economy was the risk of a major oil spill. So I decided to really focus on that to as much as I could. Council members have to be subject matter experts on everything from asphalt to zoning, but I thought this is something I should really dig into and put some attention to. And so it was a really steep learning curve as a council member. And when I didn't get reelected, I decided to keep doing that work as a consultant first, and then I became a staff member here at Friends of the San Juans.
Were you to that kind of consulting role? Had you done kind of environmental advocacy work prior to being a council member?
Well, I would say more project management work on a variety of different topics. And my only professional training is in documentary filmmaking.
Oh, well, there you go.
I worked in documentary films for some time, and yeah.
Oh, well, and now instead of being behind the camera, you're in front of the camera.
Something, yeah, right. Today, that's true. Yes.
So, what Friends of the San Juans? What enticed you to join that organization when you left the council?
Well, I think that I've lived here on San Juan Island for 34, 35 years, and I love this place. I mean, this is an amazing, special place, and every day I am just so grateful to be here. And so the mission of Friends, to protect the San Juan Islands and to protect the Salish Sea really resonates with me, and it's work that I want to do. The organization is 45 years old, or actually I should know the exact number, maybe more than that now. But in any case,
there will be a test at the end of this. There'll be a test at the end of this. Well,
I should have this fact right at my fingertips. But in any case, when the organization first started, this was back when in 1978, so the county was adopting the Growth Management Act, its first comprehensive plan. And the prosecuting attorney at that time for the county realized that it would be really helpful to have a companion nonprofit organization also working on that process with the county. And so that was the origins of the organization. And very quickly, being a county of islands with over 400 miles of shoreline, the work on the shoreline became really important, and protecting that shoreline ecosystem became really important. And then that evolved over time to recognize that the islands are really impacted by what happens in the surrounding waters. So the work to monitor and engage in the permitting processes for all the different terminal and refinery projects in the region. And just to also, one of the things we do that you mentioned before we got started is our Salish Sea vessel traffic projections work. So periodically we update that, most recently back in September of last year. And what we try to do is show where all the potential increases in vessel traffic are throughout the Salish Sea, because you and I in Washington State, we might be aware of a project down at Port of Seattle or wherever here in the state, but not necessarily aware of projects that are happening up in Canada, and vice versa. And we found that it was really helpful for the public and for decision makers to be able to kind of get a conceptual idea of what the cumulative impacts would be if all the projects that were either being proposed or were in the permit review process or were permitted but still under construction, how that would change vessel traffic numbers in the transboundary Salish Sea waters.
Yeah, I saw that report came out, and I've read it. How do you put these numbers together?
Yeah, so we use as a baseline the Department of Ecology. Every year they issue a report of the vessel entry and transits data. And so that tells us what the vessel traffic numbers are for, a baseline. And then we just, I do my best to identify all the different projects in the region. And from their permit proposal, for their proposals or their permit applications, they quantify what the vessel traffic would be. And so that's the basis of the report.
Okay. Can you kind of sum up what the report says? What are the highlights?
Yeah, good question. Let me just. So, and this is a report that was done in September of 2024. So the most recent data we had for vessel traffic numbers was from 2023. So that was the baseline. So for the most recent report, we document 23 new or expanding terminal and refinery projects. And 10 of the 23 projects would potentially add 2005 annual ocean-going vessel transits. So I count both the ingoing and the outgoing transit, but that doesn't include, like, if the ships are going to anchor or going somewhere for bunkering, that doesn't include that. So this would be an 18% increase in the large ocean-going commercial vessel traffic as compared to 2023.
What does the report say is driving that traffic?
Well, I think probably so just two of the projects. These are both in Canada. So the Trans Mountain Pipeline Expansion Project, which was completed in May. So that increase in vessel traffic started to occur last year, but wasn't in the 2023 numbers. And then also the Roberts Bank Terminal 2 container ship project proposal. It's been through a permit review process. It's received its federal and provincial permits. I believe it just has one more Department of Fisheries and Oceans permit that it needs. And then there will be some sort of process to decide whether to, like a financial decision about whether to move forward with the project. But it's essentially gone through all the permitting that it needs to do. And the Trans Mountain Pipeline Expansion Project, that, according to the application, that would increase vessel traffic transits by 696 transits per year. And then the Roberts Bank Terminal 2 project would increase container ship transits by 520 transits a year.
Okay.
So those are really the two biggest projects on the whole list in terms of, they account for over 60% of the projected vessel traffic increase.
And is that mostly going to Canada?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
It is. And what's different about the Trans Mountain Pipeline Expansion Project from the application, and I'll send you a map. So in the application, they show a map of the vessel traffic routes, and it shows the vessels coming in, from Bruy J, going up through Harrow and Boundary, and up to the Westridge Terminal in Burnaby, BC, the Trans Mountain Terminal there, and then exiting the Salish Sea on the same route. And so there was extensive analysis done based on that vessel traffic route. They did quite a bit of analysis of potential spills. They had a process for identifying various potential spill locations, and then they did quite a bit of analysis of, what would occur or what would happen if a spill occurred at these various locations. But what's actually happened is that there is vessel traffic that's coming directly to the refineries in Washington State. And initially, most of that traffic was coming down to Victoria, British Columbia through Lower Georgia, Boundary, Harrow, and then crossing over the Strait of Juan de Fuca between Victoria, BC and Port Angeles. And then from there, going to either the Vendôme Anchorage or one of the refineries. And what's happened more recently is that the tanker traffic is coming directly down from Lower Dorcas Strait down through Rosario Strait and going either directly to the Vandovi Island anchorage area or one of the refineries. And so that is different from what was in the application and what was analyzed in terms of the risk of accidents and oil spills.
The application was in Canada, though, right? It didn't have anything to do with, Washington.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, I talked to the Puget Sound pilots. I was down for a maritime day in Olympia, 2 months ago or something, and a bunch of the pilots were there, and we were talking about that route because the reason they come down Harrow Strait and stop off Victoria is to drop off the Canadian pilot, and then they cross to Port Angeles and pick up a U.S. pilot, and then continue on to the refinery. And prior to COVID, there was a program where they were doing mutual pilot rides where there'd be a Canadian pilot and a U.S. pilot or a Washington pilot on board at the same time. But when COVID came around, they stopped all that, as so many things did, right? And they've just begun. I don't know where they're at right now. They had just done a few the last time I talked to them, where they were again, putting a Canadian pilot onto the tanker, leaving, Anacortes or wherever, and the U.S. pilot would take it out of Anacortes up through Rosario, and then when they get up to just past Paytos Island, south of Point Roberts, they would switch, and the U.S. pilot would go to bed, and the Canadian pilot would take it the rest of the way in. So they avoided that swap off. I think getting that as a regular program is a work in progress, and existing U.S.-Canadian relations at the federal level have thrown another level of uncertainty into all of those kinds of things, which is super unfortunate. But there it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, and sometimes if there's not a pilot available, if to cross over from Victoria to Washington to get a pilot means that there's a Washington pilot available and a berth for them to go to. And if it's not the case, they just go back out to sea and do round turn.
Yeah, I believe that at the last Board of Pilotage Commissioners meeting, there was a motion to clarify that any tanker coming to a Washington state port or place would be required to have a Puget Sound pilot on board.
Yeah, I'm not sure where.
Don't quote me on that because yeah.
I'm not sure where the requirement is actually to pick up the pilot. I mean, it's very possible that the U.S. pilot boat runs all the way over to into Canadian waters and drops off a pilot. I just don't know.
Well, I would hope that there's a pilot on board in crossing the Strait of Juan Fuca, that's not an unpiloted ship going between, that's going across the strait there.
You have no idea.
Yeah, I don't know.
They're professional.
That would be important to make sure that happens.
Right. Yeah. Well, that's the thing. But yeah, so there's that's going on. I was looking at today at I think we're starting to see a little bit of a hit in vessel traffic from the tariffs. I'm not sure how much longer this is going to go on. But do you get the Marine Exchange weekly update that they've been publishing for, I don't know what, a month?
No.
It's not very old.
Patrick, if you're watching this, please put me on your mailing list.
I'll get to it. So they give a kind of a neat little table, a vessel snapshot. So they have a vessel traffic snapshot and a port arrival snapshot. So I think the vessel traffic snapshot is vessels arriving in Washington, and the port arrival snapshot is when the vessels actually dock, I think is how they're breaking that down. So for last week, so this came out on April 18th. Last week, and it looks at the week, it looks at this week, so this week being last week, and then it compares it to the week before. So in the previous week, 6 bulkers arrived. Last week, 9, so up 33%. Previous week, container ships 14. Last week, 10, down 40%. General cargo last week, the previous week, 3. This week, 2, down 50%. Other vessels, I'm not sure what they're fully classifying there. There was 1 arrival the week before, 0 this last week, so down 100%. Passenger vessels, 0 the week before, 2 this week, up 200%. Ro-ros are flat at 3 apiece. Tankers were flat at 7 apiece. Tugs and ATVs were up 1, so a 33% increase. And vessel vehicle cars ships were flat at 2 arrivals for each week. So it goes up and down. It's neat, it's neat to kind of grab a snapshot of each of these and start to build a file so that because after about 3 months of these, you'll be able to get some interesting trend lines, which is kind of cool. So I've started to do that, but there's not enough data. There's not enough data to have to actually graph it and be meaningful at the moment. So.
And is this similar to the reports that are available through the Harbor Safety Committee? And now I'm forgetting what they were called, but just basically the traffic levels.
Yeah, but they were giving them at like quarterly breakdowns. I think the data is the same, but now they're providing a week over week update in an effort to provide more timely data to the Marine Exchange membership. So it's a nice initiative. I like it. I look at it every week. So
great. I hope to get those.
Yeah. So Washington has entered its best achievable protection process for 2025, hoping to update oil spill preparedness and prevention and response rules in 2006. To what extent has Friends of the San Juans engaged in this process?
Yeah. So, the best achievable protection process this year, it's very different from previous years, but it's a great precursor to the rulemaking that's required every 5 years to update the oil spill contingency plan requirements. And so Friends of the San Juans, we've been very engaged with the state requirements for preparedness and advocating for improved oil spill response preparedness. And so one of the things that, we were talking about the Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion project and the increase there. And I do want to, I'll share with you a figure. RBN Energy had a blog post about this project, and they have a figure here. They talk about how the export of the heavy crude oil has gone up significantly. Just want to try to see if I can find that quote here.
Yeah, I'll make a little note at 26 minutes and 29 seconds. Insert figure. There we go.
And I can give you the link to the source here. But between May and November, let's see. Since the expansion came into service in late May, the shipment of light crude has averaged 347 million barrels per day up to November, a 61% increase over the previous average, while shipments of heavy crude have averaged 309 million barrels per day, an astounding 930% increase over the previous average. Exclamation point. And they underline an astounding 930% increase in italics. So I have a little a bar graph there, and it shows all the tanker exports of heavy crude oil from the Trans Mountain's Westridge terminal by destination. And of course, not all of that is going to Washington State refineries, in addition to, to U.S. refineries. In addition to Washington State, there's been exports from Canada to the refinery in Alaska and in California as well. But all of that crude oil, that heavy crude oil, that tar sands, diluted bitumen crude oil is going through the Salish Sea. And that increase in tanker traffic. So I talked about Ecology's vessel entry and transits data that they release every year. And they just recently released the data for 2024. And the tank ships bound for Canadian ports via the Strait of Juan de Fuca. So that would be the tankers going to Trans Mountain's Westridge terminal, or that would include those tankers. That increased more than doubled. So 173 tankers in 2023 and 352 in 2024. And Trans Mountain had said, when the project was completed, that they would be ramping up to full capacity over the course of last year. So this is going to increase even more because they're expecting to have even more tankers than what's currently reflected in the 2024 data. So I'll send you that chart there too. And I just want to mention one other thing. So one of the things that I've been observing are the tankers that are calling on the refineries in Washington State are also spending quite a bit of time at the Anchorage, the Vandover Island Anchorage area. And this is, maybe thoughts have changed about the risk of accidents at Anchorage areas since that so long container ship collided, just rammed into the Stena Immaculate tanker that was at anchor. This was in East Yorkshire, England, back in March, which was just this crazy accident that occurred. I mean, who would have thought? And
it's really fascinating to watch the AIS tracks for that incident. I think,
and thank goodness that was a U.S. flag tanker, and thank goodness for that Crowley crew that were just totally heroic and put all the firefighting gear in place. And it could have been so much worse.
Yeah, we're doing the Washington State Maritime Cooperative is hosting a shipboard firefighting exercise and seminar on June 4th in Seattle, and Mark Curtis, who was with Crowley at the time of the incident with the Stena Immaculate, who's now with Fairwater, which was a Crowley Seacorps spinoff, is going to give a short presentation at the introduction. Mark is also the board president of the Washington State Maritime Cooperative. So he's going to give a short presentation about the incident surrounding the Stena Immaculate and, what the actions that the crew took, particularly in activating the firefighting deluge system that allowed them to set fire boundaries, which prevented the spread of heat and really did limit the fire to the one impacted tank and that immediate surrounding area. Without the deluge system, who can tell what would have happened? But it would have been less good.
It would have been so much worse. Yeah.
It's gonna be he's gonna give a great talk, and got some amazing images. And TNT Salvage was initially the salver, and Jim Elliott from TNT is going to be participating in this event along with Todd Duke from Resolve. It's going to be a great first of its kind planning event in the Pacific Northwest. So I'm super.
Wow. Well, maybe you could put that clip, and if it works, to put it into this interview. It's
We're gonna,
really, I mean,
we're gonna record the whole thing. It'll probably be little podcast episodes going forward because
oh,
as
good.
as you know, and as I'm sure all of the viewers of this podcast know, you can't really separate me from WISMIC. I am now the executive director of the Washington State Maritime Cooperative, and although this podcast is not about WISMIC, um, you can't separate the fact that I am a plan holder for the state of Washington. So
Yeah.
I
So are you looking at the risk of accidents any differently in terms of tankers that are at anchor?
not really. I mean, this drill is going to be about how we form unified command during these fire events. We're very, very good at doing it for oil spills, but when we have ship fires and we, especially in port, where we involve local municipal fire departments in the early stages of response, they're very used to going it alone, right? No one, if there's a building on fire in the city, there's a house on fire, there's a tanker truck rollover, there's no unified command from the Coast Guard and the state showing up to assist them. There's no extra equipment rolling in from other agencies other than maybe fire department mutual support. They're it. But ship fires are completely different. We had the two fires in Tacoma, the Aleutian Falcon and the Kodiak Enterprise, both of which those ships both became a total constructive loss. We had the Gran Costa de Livorio in the port of New Jersey, where two firefighters unfortunately passed away. We had the Hogue Diamond in Jacksonville, where 9 firefighters were injured and 3 were medically retired. There was just a Ro-Ro fire in Belgium just last week. This is an ongoing issue. So, am I concerned about an oil spill from a tanker at the Vendovi anchorage? No, not really. I'm concerned about what happens when they, for whatever reason, catch fire in the port, and it's not just the fire. It's now the risk of oil spill is that we end up sinking the ship at the dock, or um, the hazmat on board, the toxic chemicals that are in the smoke plume that are impacting a community. Um, I'm much more concerned about that response. I mean, friends, you may not agree, and friends of the San Juans might agree, but I feel like we have the oil spill response process pretty dialed in. We've been doing this for a very long time, and we know what we're doing. My OSRO, the for WISMIC, our oil spill response organization is MSRC, and I've been involved with them since them and their predecessor here in Washington, Clean Sound, since 1997, and we feel really good about that. Diluted bitumen and sinking oils and other things aside, yes, there's still planning to be done, and we'll come back and we'll talk about that some more. But
Well, if I could just interject here in terms of tankers at anchor, I think one of the things that Friends is really concerned about is this increase in the tanker use of anchorage areas. And really, they're basically being used as the parking lot, waiting for a berth back up at the Westbridge terminal, the Trans Mountain terminal. And I just want to share one example. The Lake Stars oil tanker that transited from Trans Mountain's terminal in Burnaby, and it went down through Georgia Strait, directly into Rosario Strait, and directly down to the Vendovi Island anchorage. And then it went to the refinery for 2 days. And then on the 21st, it went back to the Vendovi anchorage area, and it stayed there until March 1st. And then it went back to the Westridge terminal. This time, though, by way of it went west and crossed the Strait of Juan de Fuca between Port Angeles and Victoria, BC, and then went up Harrow Strait, Boundary Pass, and Georgia Strait to go back to the terminal in Burnaby.
Well, I guess I'd ask, why does Friends consider that to be a problem? And we've got vessel traffic running all over the San Juans, Washington State ferries, tugboats. I mean, as a sailor, I love to see shipping going on in the world, so I'm a little biased in that regard. But can you articulate the issue?
Yeah. I mean, I think with vessel traffic, there's, two things to look at. One is vessel traffic risks, and we've talked about a number of those. So the accidents that can lead to oil spills, chemical and hazardous material spills, cargo container spills, ship strikes. When ships strike whales, that can cause their death. Release of ballast water that's containing invasive aquatic species. But then the shipping impacts are things that occur even when ships are operating safely. Underwater noise is a huge impact to the marine ecosystem. And the impacts of noise, for example, to the southern resident killer whales, this critically endangered group of whales, has been really well studied and documented. The way in which underwater noise impacts their ability to communicate, they use echolocation to find prey and catch prey. And then there's also emissions, right? So greenhouse gases and particulates. And then ships are continuing to use heavy fuel oil instead of the low sulfur fuels. They're also using exhaust gas cleaning systems or scrubbers. And that's a huge impact to the marine ecosystem. 80% of scrubbers are open loop. So all the time that the engine is running, while, if it's using an open loop scrubber, it's discharging, significant amounts of, it's not just the highly acidic sulfur oxides, it's scrubbing from the smokestacks to the requirement for low sulfur fuel is to meet the emission requirements that have been set by the IMO. And so it's not just scrubbing the highly acidic sulfur oxides that contribute to ocean acidification, but there's other toxic contaminants that are really concerning. Heavy metals, polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, the PAHs, nitrates and nitrites, sulfites and particulate matter. And the ships that use the heavy fuel oil with scrubbers emit 70% more particulate matter and up to 4.5 times more black carbon and considerably more the PAHs, the polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, through the smokestack into the atmosphere as compared with ships that use low sulfur fuel. So those are the impacts that occur, just while ships are operating safely. And so that's the concern. And I think that the example that we saw with the So Long striking the tanker that was at anchor, the Stena Immaculate, it just shows that accidents happen, right? Even the most unfathomable kind of accidents, like how did that possibly happen? It did. And we'll find out. They'll do the investigation, and there'll be a report probably, a year from now or something, and we'll find out what happened. But accidents happen. And, while the probability of a major oil spill, for example, is low in this region, the consequences would be just absolutely devastating. right?
Yeah,
Um,
they're not zero, right? That's why we plan. But
right, exactly. Yeah. So I mean, back in it was 2006, the Department of Ecology, they quantified that the economic impacts of a large oil spill at $10.8 billion and 165,000 jobs. So, and that was 2006, and numbers. And so, everything we can do to prevent oil spills and to be better prepared for an oil spill response is really important.
sure. So there's prevention, right? And so I mean, if we set the air emissions part aside for now, I know there's what I don't know what happened to the bill. It was in Washington, in the Washington State Legislature.
Yeah, and
They're still
we'll be
alive.
working on that bill and that's a bill that would require ocean-going ships to use low sulfur fuel. And
IMO, we already have we already have an agreement and ratified it with IMO. Washington State's law doesn't change the actual emissions. It doesn't really. I actually honestly don't understand the purpose other than maybe Washington wants to charge some fees. I don't know what they want to do, but
so are we talking about the bill that would require ocean-going ships to use low sulfur fuels?
yeah, it doesn't make a substantive change from what is currently the international standard. So,
Well, but I just want to be clear here that the ships that use heavy fuel oil with scrubbers, their emissions are much worse than ships that use low sulfur fuel. And that it is currently, per the US EPA and IMO, scrubbers are allowed to be used in conjunction with the use of heavy fuel oil. But things would improve not only in terms of the discharges, because all of that discharge is hugely impacting the marine ecosystem. And, and it's also impacting the atmosphere.
yeah, understood. Although,
yeah, and that bill will be back, and I'd love to get your input on it.
Is it dead now? I wasn't following. Did it?
Yeah. Yep. It didn't make it out of the policy committees in the House and Senate, but we're going to keep working on it in the interim and prepare it for success in the next session.
Yeah, I don't think that bill is really it's not in WSMIC's wheelhouse. It may be in the Marine Exchange's wheelhouse and other people's wheelhouse, but that's not
okay.
Not in our wheelhouse. We are about, I don't want to make this all about WSMIC, but we're about preparedness and prevention and response. I mean, we were created by the state of Washington originally. Our DNA is as much environmental protection as it is regulatory compliance, and I want to stick to to the mission, right? We have a lane to be in, right?
Yeah. Well, so let me ask you this, Dan. So if you had a choice, I mean, this is kind of an odd question. Hypothetically, if you had a choice to respond to a spill of heavy fuel oil or a spill of low sulfur fuel, which would you choose?
Well,
which would be the less challenging?
That's a really interesting question, because we were just getting a presentation the other day about low sulfur fuel oils, and I'm going to have to do a little bit more research, but they present some of their own difficulties. So I would say that I want to prepare for oil spills, and I don't want to respond to any of them, right? I was on the new Carissa. I was on the Casca Busan. I was at Deepwater Horizon. I've seen enough oil spills in my day that I don't want to see any more. And like I said, I'm way more concerned about the impacts of ship fires. I went up to Anchorage to be the planning section chief. for the Genius Star 11 fire. That was the ship that had a thermal runaway and their lithium-ion battery cargo at sea, and we brought them into Dutch Harbor for firefighting and salvage. And I learned more about lithium-ion batteries than I ever thought I would know. And there's a lot of talk about fighting fires on ships that have, especially electric vehicles with lithium-ion batteries on board. But in my view, how to fight that fire, those are tactics. And I'm leaving that to the fire department and to the salvage marine firefighting contractor. WISMIC's role is to make sure that we bring all those things together as rapidly as possible, and we have a coordinated response. And that's where I'm at. Todd Duke, Jim Elliott, these guys are going to go deal with the ship, and they're going to do great. I'm just going to make sure they have all the support they possibly could.
So you feel like there are the on-water firefighting resources needed to respond to a ship fire?
Yes and no. So ship fires are a really interesting thing. They're a marathon, not a sprint, and you can't fight them the way you fight a building fire. And so it takes some time. So the fact that you are going to take 6-12 hours to ramp up salvage marine firefighting contractor response, provided we have responded effectively in the beginning, that we have closed watertight doors, closed shut-off ventilation, closed fire dampers, release the fixed system into the affected space if appropriate. We've set fire boundaries. We're cooling the side shell, and once those doors are closed, we don't open them up for any reason until we have a salvage team on site ready to go. Then yeah, I think we're fine. If you want to open those doors that have already been closed and rush in with an attack team with hand lines, yeah, there's going to be a problem. So this is about planning, and this is exactly why we are conducting the exercise that we're conducting in June. And Captain McDonald, captain of the port, is committed to being the FOSC. Dave Byers, who's the head of response for Ecology, will be in the SOSC chair. We'll have a deputy chief from Seattle Fire in the Seattle firefighting chair. Tacoma Fire, Seattle Fire, Bainbridge Fire, all participating. This is going to be an amazing planning event, but it's a little off the board from what we normally do for oil spill response. But we're required to respond to issues that not only are an active spill, but represent a significant threat of pollution. And ship fires represent a significant threat of pollution, particularly oil spills, because history has shown us for 100 years that the way you put out a ship fire at the dock is you sink it, right? You fill it full of water until it rolls on its side, and then all the fuel comes pouring out the deck vents. So putting out the fire isn't, that's always the goal in land-based firefighting. Putting out the fire on a ship is not necessarily the goal, because if it results in an oil spill, if it results in a large environmental impact as a result of the tactics used to put that fire out, you still lost. Right? Mm-hmm. The ship's insured, the cargo's insured. Let's not sink the ship. Number one objective. Everybody listening, hello, don't sink the ship.
Are you going to be doing a similar training for a fire on a ship out in the open water? Transiting narrow boundary or Strait of Juan Fuca?
I hadn't gotten to that point yet. What I'm thinking of doing, what I'm planning to do, is take the same time period in June and do something similar, only stretch it out over 2 days in 2026, and make it more of a not an oil spill conference, but a maritime vessel all hazards with a very specific firefighting interdiction plan where we not only we do command, but we also can do tactics where we're discussing ventilation, and we can get into the whole lithium ion battery thing. I think the mistake that people are making in this planning is that they start with the idea that you have a lithium ion battery fire, and then everybody wants to talk about how you put that fire out. And the answer is, you don't. And the second answer, the answer is it's not actually a fire, right? It's a thermal runaway that's a chemical reaction. And if there's actually flames involved, it's because the surrounding insulation, the plastics, the container, that caught on fire. But the batteries are in thermal runaway. And there is nothing on this earth that is going to put that out. You just got to let it burn. And you got to let it run its course. So that's the issue there. And so I don't think it's helpful to talk about what is actually on fire when you can't agree on how to come together as a collective to respond to it in the first place. That's the first problem. That's why we're doing the exercise.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know if you remember the Zim Kingston back in 2021. It caught fire. It lost containers. Came in Strait of Juan de Fuca, and it was anchoring on Constance Bank there near Victoria when it caught fire.
Yep.
And that was a pretty small container ship. I want to say it was about 5,000 TEUs. But there were some containers on board that were carrying, I can't remember. I just pulled up an article here on my phone, but they were carrying hazardous materials. And it was so fortunate because there were two Maersk supply ships that had firefighting capability that just happened to be right there, either in Sydney or Victoria, coming back from another from somewhere else. Anyways, they just happened to be there and they could pull them into service. But that fire was just so it was just really scary to watch. And it was a really small container ship, I mean, like these container ships that are being proposed for Roberts Bank Terminal 2 up in Canada, that's like they're proposing to build this entire island terminal out in the middle of the water to accommodate the ultra large container ships. So like 24,000 TEUs. So hopefully we're ready to respond to a fire aboard one of those kinds of ships.
Yeah, that's tough because if the fire is in the container, so many different cargoes. There was a recent container ship fire where there was a container layer of lithium ion batteries, and right above it was fireworks. So that's really difficult, and I don't even know what to say about that. But when we're talking about oil tankers, at least our tanker escorts, like the Lindsay and the Garth Foss, they have twin 6,000 gallon a minute fire monitors on those things. I mean, they're amazing, and they built them with the cooling sprinkler system. So they turn on their sprinkler system, and it encases the tug in a firefighting fog to protect the tug from heat, so that they can even get closer. They're my two favorite tugs running around Puget Sound. Those things are awesome. I'd love to drive one. Hey Foss, I'd like to drive one. Yeah, so that's cool. Well, let's go back to BAP, right? So yeah, so we've got the non-floating oils, or oils that, due to their properties, could become non-floating.
Yeah, and that's a work group that I requested.
Yeah,
and it was like motivated by this completion of the Trans Mountain Pipeline Expansion project and this huge increase in tanker traffic and the export of that heavy tar sands, diluted bitumen, crude oil. And I'll just say that I sent an email to Wendy and Matt, asking if it was possible to run a scenario of a spill near Turn Point and model, what the response could potentially be in that scenario. So, and for our group, for our work group. So we'll see if that's something that they can put together based on, I think NOAA has some spill modeling that they can do to kind of show what would happen. And then.
Yeah, they can run GNOME. Have you ever run GNOME?
I have GNOME.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I mean, they can do it for just training purposes. You can run the online version.
Yeah.
It's really a matter of whether or not they've got the right oil in the audio's database to run it with, so that you get the right, evaporation, dispersion numbers in the thing. As long as that's there, it should be pretty good.
Yeah. And the main question is, can there be a fast, aggressive, well-coordinated, effective response at that location?
Right.
Given where all the equipment is currently staged and all the personnel are currently staged. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, certainly you could run a planning model for that. I'm sure that
Yeah. So hopefully Wendy can do that for our work group.
Yeah, good.
Yeah.
And then what else is in BAP? We've got SCAT. I don't know that. Did you guys, what else did you put comments in for? I guess for a good question.
Well, so another thing that I submitted for a request, and the response from Ecology was that there wasn't the need for a work group to address this, but that it could be considered for the scope of the rulemaking. But that is to, so there's planning standard requirements for each of the planning standard areas. And the request is to look at staging additional resources, equipment and personnel to meet the 4 and 6 hour planning standards, having those be resident in San Juan County to just increase the ability, improve the oil spill response preparedness for this region. So that was something that I submitted a request for, and I'm not clear what the process is going to be. They didn't set up a work group, but there's going to be some kind of process to look at potentially addressing that in the rulemaking. And then I urged, so San Juan County has a great whale scientist on staff, Dr. Frances Robertson, and I urged her to submit a request for the BAP work group that's looking at being more prepared to both monitor, for reconnaissance monitoring, and then making sure that southern resident killer whales stay away from a major oil spill. And having a system in place so that there's preparedness for that, instead of trying to pull something together, in the event of a major spill. So to have, like a wildlife response contractor take that on as part of their services, and that they would be compensated so that they would have all the necessary personnel and equipment, the trainings and the preparedness to be able to implement that in the event of a spill.
And were those the only 2 issues for which you submitted BAP comments?
Yes. Well, I just submitted the 2, the increasing oil spill preparedness, response preparedness for the San Juan County Planning Standard area, and then looking at our preparedness for response to non-floating oils. And it's but that one both has to do with, we currently in the state, we have a definition that in some ways is really good and really appropriate. It's this umbrella definition for non-floating oils, but it's like everything from Bakken crude to like asphalt. And, we know that there's differences in the way these will behave when they spill into the water. but they're all in that one umbrella definition and that one planning standard requirement in the state code. So just to make sure that there aren't, best achievable protection, additional technologies and tactics out there we shouldn't be incorporating to address the non-floating oils, like the heavy diluted bitumen.
Right. Well, the plan holders currently are required to evaluate within 1 hour whether the product that has been spilled has the potential to become non-floating. So the plan holders are required to look at the products that are being transported by vessel members or being used at the facility. So we get most of our Bakken crude, actually maybe all, but most of our Bakken crude in Washington by rail. It's coming out of the Bakken region of North Dakota and coming into the refineries and unit trains in that way. There was a period of time where Bakken crude was being transloaded onto barges in the Columbia River. I don't think that's happening right now. The facility that was doing that is currently working with renewable diesel and not Bakken crude. But like Bakken crude is a great example of a product that is never going to become non-floating, right? It's basically gasoline that comes out of the ground. It's got a flash point of minus 40 degrees Fahrenheit as opposed to minus 45 degrees Fahrenheit of gasoline. Whatever you spill, 90% of that stuff is going to evaporate within 6 hours. That's not a thing. As opposed to the diluted bitumen, which is a completely different product, as opposed to Alaska North Slope crude, which, 20 years ago was a much lighter product that was much less likely to become non-floating. But that's not what's really coming out of the ground today. It's got fewer light ends and it's a little heavier. So and all these products are a little different. So you have to look pretty closely at what is being transported and what was spilled in order to develop strategies and tactics.
Mm-hmm.
So we don't see a lot of Bakken on the water here, but so most Bakken that gets spilled because a train derailed or
yeah, and a lot of the rail tracks are right on the shore, so it's not inconceivable that there won't be a spill to water. So, and obviously the refineries are right on the shore too.
Right, and along the
hopefully it never happens, but in any case, it'll be good to reevaluate the state's requirements regarding non-floating oils, especially in light of the increase in the transport through these waters.
Sure. Well, we've been going for a while. We should probably wrap it up. Do you have a final comment that you'd like to make before we call this to a close?
Well, Dan, I just really appreciate you inviting me to your show. I know I'm not your usual guest, and I hope you'll consider bringing in other people who are working to advocate for improved oil spill prevention and spill response preparedness. And I think that, as I said at the start of the show, my motivation is protecting this special place. And I invite you to come and visit, and please, let me know if you're going to be in Friday Harbor. I'd love to get together and take you out and show you my favorite places and introduce you to my teammates who do great work restoring shorelines and protecting habitat for forage fish that feed the salmon, that feed the southern resident killer whales, and just learn more about what we're doing here. And just thank you so much.
Well, I appreciate the invitation. I'll take you up on that. Lovel
Pratt, please do.
Friends of the San Juans, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Dan.
If you're getting value from the tactics meeting, whether it's maritime safety, environmental insight, or just good conversation, consider supporting the show. We're a lean crew with a big mission, and your support helps keep the command post running smoothly.